recognize the Honourable Member for Spruce Grove, St. Albert.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to begin by recognizing the Indigenous peoples of Alberta. My constituency includes the Alexander First Nation, as well as the historic land of the Michel people, both of whom signed Treaty 6. I am proud to see the continued efforts to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, some of which are present in the throne speech. As a member of the Métis Nation, I would also like to recognize that both Spruce Grove and St. Albert have had a long history with the Métis, including the founding of St. Albert and the habitation of the Lac Saint Anne Métis in the western portion of their lands. I am proud to rise today to respond to this speech from the throne as the member for Spruce Grove St. Albert. I was quite thrilled to hear the famous five recognized in her honor's address. The right to vote, indeed the duty to vote, is one of our most important rights. And I am proud to say that my family has long been committed to human rights and public service, a tradition I am honored to continue in this assembly. There are two members of my family tree I would like to take a moment to discuss a bit, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge some others. On my father's side, we signed the Magna Carta, starting the long road of human rights. On my mother's side, we have James McKay, who served as a judge on the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal, Gladys Bigg, my 99-year-old great-grandmother, who served as deputy mayor of Westlock and as a member of the Athabasca University Board. And in addition, we had countless factors from the days when Alberta was dominated by the fur trade. The first person I would like to discuss fits nicely into the throne speech. A few members have laid claim to Nellie McClung, and I'm sure they're all pleased to know that I am not about to do the same. According to family mythology, I am related to Edith McTavish Rogers, the first woman elected in Manitoba. As a result of her work with veterans, she was committed to working for labor rights against her Liberal Party lines. She represented Canada at the Geneva Convention, defining the rights of prisoners of war and civilians in a war zone. In sum, she fought for rights that are now fundamental, both in Canada and internationally, and this is a tradition I wish to emulate. The second person I would like to discuss a bit is my great-grandfather, Jack Bigg. He was a veteran of World War II, having previously served in the RCMP, and he played a season with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, although we won't hold that against him. He was personally asked to run by John Diefenbaker, and as a veteran, and in recognition of both his constituents and his Métis roots, he committed his life to fighting for Indigenous and veterans' rights. In recognition of his work, he was named Chief Almighty Voice. Last I heard, his headdress is still on display in the Westlock Museum. As a signatory to the Canadian Bill of Rights, I find his commitment to fighting for the rights of Canadians inspiring, though I am sure we would not agree on much policy beyond that. Mr. Speaker, as one of the youngest members in this legislature, I am honored to represent the people of Spruce Grove St. Albert. The two cities I represent are routinely named among the best cities in Canada to raise a family. Both Spruce Grove and St. Albert are served by wonderful teachers, school boards, and they both offer a wide variety of services. This has brought recognition, but it has also brought a lot of growth. Spruce Grove in particular has exploded in population, especially in the past 10 years. This growth has brought with it new challenges, some related to the median age of the constituency, and some to growing population. The first big issue my constituency faces is that of an infrastructure deficit. Years of cuts and delayed projects have left us with a pressing deficit. One road in particular has been discussed and re-examined and rediscussed since the social credit was on this side of the aisle. Another project, a school in St. Albert, had originally been promised a renovation by Premier Getty, and they're just now receiving that renovation. Neither of my communities have seen a new school since Premier Getty, although we have seen replacements. Having said that, we are seeing 3 new school builds, so I'm optimistic on that. And certainly being recognized as some of the best creates a certain level of demand. This leads us to the other issue in my constituency. The demand for, or the recognition of being a great place to raise young families has brought a young population. Like many young Albertans, my constituents are faced with the fact that tuition rates and school fees are climbing faster than incomes, making it that much harder to access post-secondary education. This is forcing many parents to take out a second or even a third mortgage to provide their children with the chance of an education while mom and dad are trying to save for retirement. On top of that, many students, I dare say most of the ones I have met, are forced to take out student loans. Textbooks are becoming increasingly expensive, and for those students from out of town, whether they're from a rural setting or simply a different urban one, or who don't live with their family, have to find housing and cover the costs of living. With an eye on that, I'm not going to get into the impact of finding employment around class times and studying on top of that, Mr. Speaker, but I will say that it has left many of the younger MLAs well-equipped to deal with the long hours of debate we experienced a few months ago. So now our students have an education. They have the marketable skills they need to find employment, but they now face a market where most positions are asking for experience, where the positions they are qualified for are often taken by people a few generations older. This is for a position that used to be an entry-level job. So faced with a cycle of debt and compounded with a difficult market to make use of the education that started it, I completely lost that. Mr. Speaker, Spruce Grove St. Albert is noteworthy for finding grassroots solutions to problems that face our whole province. Our citizens have developed some especially amazing programs supporting mental health as well as young mothers. Compassionate Connections is committed to helping young mothers with accessing food, clothing, and household supplies, efforts that I'm sure the famous 5 would have appreciated. Now, both Spruce Grove and St. Albert are suburbs, and there's a lot of research proving that suburbs can be a lonely place, leading to mental health issues. But we have many organizations working to address that. The Spruce Grove and Area Friendship Connection is an online support network helping people face feelings of isolation and loneliness. We also have Augie's Cafe, a group who meets every Tuesday, just a short walk from my office, and endeavors to provide individuals who feel isolated a place to socialize and enjoy a nutritionally balanced meal. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, the spirit of the community-minded, caring, and neighborly Albertan is alive and well in Spruce Grove St. Albert. I am proud to note that my constituency has led on environmental causes. It's no mistake that the Minister of Environment is a graduate of the Spruce Grove education system. The city recently opened a new public works facility that makes use of passive lighting, geothermal, and water conservation to strive to be as environmentally friendly as possible. Also in Spruce Grove, we have Greenberry, a neighborhood using wind turbines to power their streetlights in a push towards carbon neutrality. And these are but some of the initiatives in my constituency, and I look forward to many more. In her honors speech, there was a commitment to help the many Albertans facing tough economic times. With the current environment, while the current environment makes that much more important than ever, we need to work towards this through boom or bust. My constituency, along with the rest of the province, is faced with a lack of affordable housing. This is true in both rural and urban settings, as I'm sure all members in this assembly are aware. While there are many great organizations working to address this gap, both in my constituency and throughout the province, I cannot stress enough that we have fallen short. From our younger Albertans trying to start a life on their own, to families working multiple jobs, to our seniors and our most vulnerable, the challenge in finding affordable housing is daunting and something that all Albertans should be concerned about. Now, it's not as simple as just finding any old house. Many groups are faced with additional restrictions. One group in particular are Albertan families, especially single parents or those working irregular hours, are faced with the added challenge of finding housing that allows children and that has reasonable access to schools and childcare. It's not all gloom and doom on this file, Mr. Speaker, as I was pleased to note that I was pleased to see that the affordable housing will be a priority for the new Minister of Seniors and Housing, and I look forward to following the results of their work going forward. Mr. Speaker, the throne speech notes that we need to diversify our energy markets, and I couldn't agree more. For too long, we have relied on a subset of energy products and on a narrow selection of customers. I'm sure all members in this Assembly can appreciate the impact hydraulic fracturing has had on the market to the south of us, especially as our best customer has now found a cheaper product. And now we have to change how we act. While in the past it was sufficient to focus on our southern neighbors, we now need to look for new markets, whether that's to Tidewater or to our eastern Canadian partners who are currently importing oil from the Middle East more than they are from us. We need new markets. As Her Honour mentioned in the throne speech last week, Canada's inability over the last 10 years to pursue a strategic energy policy supported by Canadians has made it impossible so far for our country to diversify our markets. I'm proud to see that our Premier and our government is taking significant strides to promote a drama-free and collaborative approach to pipeline construction. The implementation of the Climate Leadership Plan will further improve Alberta's reputation, allowing us to access new markets and protecting jobs in our largest industry. Mr. Speaker, the politics of division, the politics used and promoted by the opposition have failed. It is my opinion that if a project passes through 6 premiers without shovels in the ground, we should probably readdress how we are approaching it. If our partners in every direction are calling for action on climate change, the answer is not to ignore these calls, but to work toward them. I am proud to say that this government is working towards that, Mr. Speaker. We need to look at a variety of energy sources, solar, wind, natural gas, and dare I say geothermal, alongside continued efforts to make sure that we continue to have the cleanest oil on the market. Now, many are concerned that an increase in renewable energy would be an overnight change, and I would have to agree that such an approach would only shock the system. What we need to do is create a blend of products, and I am proud to say that I am seeing this approach from our government. The beginnings of this is the access to supports municipalities and farmers have when they are looking at solar power. We have a long way to go, Mr. Speaker, but Albertans are hardworking and entrepreneurial people, and I believe that with a little support from this Assembly, we will all enjoy a stronger, resilient, and diverse economy.